Hello everyone, welcome back, and today we are going to explore something really interesting and important in the world of plants, that is the process of sexual reproduction. So let's dive in. Now let's take a moment to appreciate how lucky we are that plants reproduce sexually. When you look at the flower, whether it is the sweet smell of the rose or the vibrant color of the sunflower, it's all part of plant strategy to reproduce. These stunning features aren't just for our enjoyment, they are crucial for attracting pollinators like bees and birds. Now, what exactly is present in the flower which is responsible for reproduction? So, first of all, flowers are the part of the plant that is responsible for sexual reproduction, or we can say they are the site of sexual reproduction in flower. Yes. Now think about it. Without flower, we won't have this incredible variety of fruits, or we can say seeds, that we rely on for food. And sexual reproduction is essential for the biodiversity we see in the plants world, right? But what exactly is present in the flower, that we need to learn, right? So plants, some petals are present in the plant. We already know about petals. These are bright, attractive part of the plant, right? What else is present in the flower apart from the petals? So some other structure present in the flower. These are male reproductive organ and female reproductive organ. So look at this structure. These are what? These are male reproductive part of the flower. So we can observe more than one male reproductive organs or structure present in the flower. What else is present apart from these male reproductive organ? Female reproductive organ is also present in the flower. A large view of male and female reproductive organ, or what exactly is present inside it, that we will learn. Now, what we call this male reproductive part present in the flower? So the male reproductive organ in flower is known as androecium, and the female reproductive part in the flower is known as gynoecium. Clear? Now we can observe one thing. More than one male reproductive organs are present even in single flower. So which one is androecium? Which one is androecium? Actually, all of them are collectively known as androecium. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all these 6 collectively known as what? Androecium. Then what is the name of this individual unit? There must be some name of this individual unit of male reproductive system in the flower, or male reproductive part in the flower. So we call it stamen. The single one is what? This is stamen. Male reproductive part, stamen. And collectively we call them androecium. Now, what exactly, or what are the other structure present in the male reproductive unit of the flower? So, think about it. Look at the structure first. When we closely observe this structure, we can see two different type of, we can say, structure present here, right? So, this long cylinder part is known as what? This long cylinder part is known as filament, and the structure which is present at the top is nothing but, which structure it is? It is anther. So the structure which is long and cylinder is known as filament, and the structure which is present at the top of the filament is anther. Anther is important. Actually all the structure are important, but what exactly is present inside the anther? Yes, pollen grains. Pollen grains are produced inside anther, which is responsible for sexual reproduction in the flower. Now consider anther like a bag. Which one is anther? This part is anther, and this long cylinder part is filament. Now consider this anther like this bag. Why? Now we can observe 4 chambers in this bag. Chamber 1, chamber 2, chamber 3, chamber 4. So we can say 4 empty chambers are present in this bag. Similarly, in anther, there are 4 chambers and we call these chambers pollen, sac or microsporangia. Now, let's say this in this pollen, in this what we call it anther, inside this anther, let's say there are 4 chamber. This is just a rough diagram for representation purpose only. There are 4 chambers and inside these chamber, first of all, these chamber, what we call these chamber, these are microsporangia. These are what? These are microsporangia. So one microsporangia, another microsporangia, third microsporangia and fourth microsporangia. So there are 4 microsporangia present in one anther. Now what is present inside these 4 chamber or 4 room or 4 compartment? Any idea? So now imagine that these space, or we can say these compartment in the bag is or are filled with puffed rice. Similarly, inside these empty chamber or the compartment, what is present? Pollen grain. Yes, you heard me right. So pollen grains are produced inside microsporangia. Now why this name is microsporangia? So again, look at this structure. This we already covered, right? Anther, and the long cylinder part is filament. There are 4 chamber and these chamber are filled with pollen grains. And what we call these chamber? Pollen, sac or microsporangia. Clear? Now, since there are 4 chamber and the anther is bilobed, there must be certain kind of division between these compartment or chamber or what? Or microsporangia, right? So what is the layer or the separation or the compartment is made up of, or how many layers are present in the microsporangia or around the microsporangia? So basically there are 4, let's say for example, let's say this empty space. Around this empty space there are 4 layers. Layer 1, layer 2, layer 3 and layer 4. These 4 layers are made up of what? Obviously tissue, because we are talking about a biological system. But the name of these 4 layers are different. The innermost layer is known as tapetum. Yeah, different kind of name. So TT, table tennis. Innermost layer is tapetum. Outermost layer, epidermis. Easy one, right? And the middle layer is known as middle layer, which is present at the center. So clear? Innermost is tapetum, outermost is epidermis. The layer which is present in the middle is known as middle layer. One more layer is present, which is not present at the end, but just beneath the outermost layer, which is endothecium. Clear? So there are 4 layers of microsporangium. These are epidermis, endothecium, middle layer and tapetum. Why this innermost layer is important? Because it helps nourish the developing embryo, developing pollen grains. So from this line we can understand that pollen grains are not present as it is. Yes, they are developed inside the microsporangia. The same question I was about to ask you, whether pollen grains are present as it is in the microsporangia or they'll develop by some kind of process. So pollen grains are developed inside microsporangium by a process known as microsporogenesis. The name of the process is microsporogenesis. So from which cell pollen grains are produced? So pollen grains are produced from microspore mother cell. Clear? So from single microspore mother cell, so let's say this is single microspore mother cell. What do we call it? Microspore mother cell. From single microspore mother cell, 4 other cell will produce. 4 other cell will produce. So 1, 2, 3 and 4. What we call them? we call them microspore tetrad. Now imagine if 4 cell will produce from the single cell, means what kind of division it is? It's a haploid division obviously, and the process is meiosis. Yes, it's not mitosis, it's meiosis. So through the meiosis process, 4 cell, or we can say microspore tetrad, since it's more than one, so microspore tetrads from single microspore mother cell by haploid division. And so how pollen grains will produce? Ultimately we need to form pollen grains, right? Yes or no? So from these microspore tetrad, pollen grains will produce. When the microspore dissociate and mature, it will form into pollen grains. So ultimately pollen grains will produce. And we call this process what? Microsporogenesis. So remember, pollen grains are haploid, they are not diploid. Clear? We are talking about flowering plant. So again, let's revise it one more time. So the process of meiosis in the microsporangium, that from microspore, is known as microsporogenesis, and it leads to the formation of pollen grain, which will eventually be released. Right? Now let's come to the structure of pollen grain. What exactly the pollen grain look like? What is the size and what is present inside the pollen grain? So the size of pollen grains are obviously very small. It is around 25 to 50 micrometer in diameter. Size is very small. What is pollen grain? They are male gametophyte, meaning what? Basically, they carry the plant's genetic material ready to fertilize the female ovule. Clear? Now, if you ever touch the anther of the flower, like hibiscus, you might have noticed a yellow powdery substance on your finger. Well, that's pollen only. Under microscope, you will see pollen grains come in the, you will see pollen grain in the microscope, you will see pollen grains come in all different shape, size and design. Look at this picture. When we see pollen grains in the microscope, specifically electron microscope, we can see a different type of pollen grains. Why different type of pollen grains? Because each unique to a species of different plants. Clear? Now, if we look at individual structure of the pollen grain, if we take one pollen grain, I want to see what exactly is present inside the pollen grain. So inside the pollen grain, or if we talk about the structure of pollen grain, there are two layers present in the pollen grain. The outermost layer is known as exine and the inner layer is known as entine. The outer layer is made up of sporopollenin, which is the most resistant material, organic material, and it is resistant to high temperature and extreme environmental condition. Contains germ pore where sporopollenin absent. Meaning what? So for example, let's say this is the structure of pollen grain, and this outermost layer is what? Sporopollenin. Then sporopollenin layer is not continuous, it's absent here, right? So this part where sporopollenin is absent, we call it what? Germ pore, right? And this outermost layer is nothing but exine. Inner layer we already know it is entine. Now outermost layer is made up of sporopollen. What's about inner layer? So inner layer is made up of cellulose and pectin. We can observe that inner layer is continuous. There is no germ pore or other pore is present in the inner layer. And cytoplasm is definitely present inside the pollen grain cell, right? Now let's look at the function of exine and the germ pore. So exine, it's the outermost layer, it's very hard, right? It's very hard, so it helps in protecting the pollen grain. Also, it helps in preserving the pollen grain as fuel for resistant to decay. Germ pore is the space where exine is not present, which helps the pollen grain to form a pollen tube during the process of fertilization, or we can say to facilitate the process of fertilization exactly. If we look at the structure of pollen cell inside the enzyme, we can observe two cells. So let's say this is the structure of pollen grain. We can observe two cells. One is vegetative cell, another is a generative cell. So the vegetative cell is larger one. So let's say this is the structure of pollen grain. So the bigger cell which is present inside the pollen grain is what? It's a vegetative cell. And inside the vegetative cell, irregular shaped nucleus is also present. Clear? Now, in the cytoplasm of this vegetative cell, one more cell is present. We call it generative cell. Since one more cell is present, that means there must be some nucleus of the cell as well, right? So basically, it's a two-cell structure. Yes, one is vegetative cell, another is generative cell. Vegetative cell is larger and it contains abundant food material, right? And generative cell is smaller compared to vegetative cell. When generative cell divide further, it form two male gamete in some species. So again, look at the structure. This is vegetative cell. The below one, which floats in the cytoplasm of a vegetative cell, that's a generative cell. This generative cell will further divide and form two male gamete, and these male gamete will release in the they'll participate in the process of fertilization and release an female gametophyte. Clear? That we will learn in the next class, how the event of fertilization takes place in the flowering plant. Clear? Now next is what? Next is some more information about pollen grain. So pollen grains can cause some unwanted disease, or we can say unwanted effect as well. So many species release pollen grain that trigger allergies in human being. This leads to some kind of problems as well, like asthma and bronchitis. One of the example is parthenium or carrot grass, which was introduced to India with imported wheat, right? And has become a major allergen. Is there any positive effect as well of pollen grains? Yeah, interestingly, pollen grains are rich in nutrient, and in some countries they used in food product as well, like pollen tablets and pollen syrup as well. These products claim to improve athletic performance and overall improvement of health as well. In fact, some people even use them as a dietary supplement. Okay. One last point about pollen grain is about its viability. How long they can survive once they'll release. So, for example, it depends again on different type of species of plants. So once they'll release pollen grain have to land on the stigma of the flower or the female reproductive part of the flower. But how long they can remain viable, for what purpose? For fertilization, obviously. So again, the answer depends on particular species of the plant. But in some species like rice and wheat, pollen loses its viability in just 30 minutes. But in other species like Rosaceae family, pollen can remain viable for month. So it completely depends on a particular species. If we talk about storage of pollen grain, so we can store it for multiple purpose. So how to store it? First of all, it's even possible to store pollen grain for years using liquid nitrogen, which keeps its temperature as low as minus 196 degree Celsius. This is useful in pollen bank for what purpose? For agriculture research and crop breeding program as well. So I guess that's all about male reproductive part of the flower, female reproductive part of the flower. What are the different structure present in male reproductive part of the flower? How anther form, and ultimately how the germ cell produce inside the anther. So thank you so much for joining the class. And in the next class, we will learn about female reproductive part in the flower, and the next process is fertilization in the flower. So all right, thanks for watching.